India's successful G20 summit has drawn global acclaim, with corporate India echoing the sentiment. R. Dinesh, president of CII, discussing how the G20 outcomes will benefit Indian companies and various sectors in an exclusive chat with BTTV's managing editor Siddharth Sarabi. Listen in.
What do you see as the most central part of the entire G20 summit with regard to India's economy and Indian industry, the future and the positive potential that is likely?
Thank you, Siddharth. Pleasure to be there again with you. I think first and foremost, we have to congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister for actually getting this declaration done in a very comprehensive manner. I think the fact that this presents opportunity to industry in many different ways. First and foremost, the fact that we have talked about the issues which industry or I would call it the MSMEs and the livelihood businesses which are part of industry have to face, and as they go through this sustainability transition, the funding for their requirements, their ability to be ready for the future, and equally importantly, the digital transformation is something which I think is creating very good and interesting opportunities for India and Indian industry. Equally important is, I think, making sure that we have the African Union as part of the G20, and that again makes a huge continent available for as part of the global growth story of bringing together this. So I think in many different ways, I think there are new opportunities which have been opened up, and I don't want to talk about, I will talk a little bit later about the adjacencies to the G20 which has also taken place.
There was a massive B20 summit also, the attendance there showcasing the interest that foreign investors and companies have towards India. The fact that India pulled off not only from the diplomatic perspective in terms of the summit declaration, but so many other bilaterals with different countries, a very substantial follow-up bilateral between United States President and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What kind of message would it have sent to the larger foreign investor community?
You know, bilaterals outside or along adjacent to the G20, I think they have been incredible. If I look at the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, if I look at the opportunities which have been presented by the various strategic government-to-government discussions with Saudi Arabia, with the US, with various other countries, I think they are all opportunities which we from the industry side have to seize on, and as they develop and as they mature, I think they will create even more rub-off benefit in terms of not just companies who are benefiting from this, but also the whole sector which are benefiting from this. And the last and the most important point is ability for India and Indian companies to become part of global value chains, which process has been speeded up by A, creation of the India brand, B, acceptance that India can be a trusted partner and will continue to be a trusted, Indian companies can be trusted partners for global value chains.
Retail inflation in India moderated to 6.83% in August after reaching a 15-month high of 7.4% in July as vegetable prices cooled off. Even though inflation has cooled off more than expected, the headline number stays above the RBI's tolerance band of 2 to 6% for the second month in a row. Meanwhile, India's industrial output surged 5.7% in July, up from 3.7% in June 2023. Now, a day after a record high on D Street, mid and small caps experienced a sharp decline, with 90% of stocks closing lower, marking the biggest decline of the year, in fact. Benchmark indices Sensex and Nifty managed to maintain relatively stable. Large cap IT and banking stocks lending support and offsetting some of the losses we saw in the broader market. BSE listed companies witnessed a fall in market cap of nearly 6 lakh crores today, and the Sensex managed to otherwise gain about 94 points, closing at 67,221. Nifty experiencing a modest decline as well, just about flat on close. Top gainers today on the index: TCS, L&T, Infi, Divi's Lab, Ultratech Cement on your charts there. On the downside, BPCL, Power Grid, NTPC, Adani Enterprises and Coal India, some of the laggards in trade. My colleague Sakshi Batra spoke with market veteran Devina Mehra to understand what's next for the Nifty after 20,000. Mehra believes that even after record levels, the Nifty and large caps may continue to reward investors. However, it's time to be cautious when it comes to the broader market.
Wonderful achievement at that on the Nifty, something that we had been waiting for with bated breath. But what's next now? That is the question that comes to the mind for all the investors. I mean, would you turn more cautious or would you continue to ride the happy wave right now?
Okay, so I had, if you see my social media, I had said end of March that this is time to be invested and you will miss out, you're more likely to miss out on an up move rather than a crash if you don't invest right now. And of course, it's gone up since then, but I still remain positive on the Nifty and particularly on the large cap space. So, I mean, I always like to take a very long view of things. So if you look at the Indian market, people expect 15-16% equity compounding, because that's been the compounded since the Sensex started. NSE had not even come in by then. I mean, I still remember my interview at the NSE when the NSE was getting formed. So I was one of the founding members.
Wow. Wow.
There was actually a written test and then an interview. So,
okay.
So as far as as I said, equities are concerned, that's the long-term compounding, but it varies very widely, not just from year to year, but decade to decade. So in the 80s, if you had invested 100 rupees at the beginning, you would have, it would have gone up 7 times in a decade. That 2010 to 20 decade, it went up only 2.3 times, barely beating fixed deposit returns. So that decade, the returns were far below trend. And even this, the 3 years that have passed, we haven't seen any great compounding, primarily because 2022 was such a disastrous year for the global market. So we had only a 12% compounding, so 12.5. So we are still not above the trend line. So there's a risk of a crash is still minimum. Again, the risk of missing out on an up move is more significant.
After the successful G20 summit, where India showcased its fintech prowess to the world, Yashish Dahiya, Chairman and CEO of PB Fintech, spoke with my colleague Sakshi Batra on what's next for the fintech industry. Here's more.
Your first thoughts on India's G20 victory and the way India has made its mark on the global economic landscape with this achievement.
I think it's a historic moment. It's a time, obviously, the Amrit Kal has started. And within the Amrit Kal, we are a few years in. And I think the next few decades are going to see a historic rise of India in terms of growth, in terms of removal of poverty, in terms of our digital public infrastructure, making inroads and having a huge amount of financial inclusion. And I think it's one of those events which is very rare for the whole world. And at that stage, to host the G20 and get 100% consensus, I think it's a great time for India. It just signals. I know some of these things are nominal, but it signals a time for India where India is considered and respected as a leading nation and the one that is likely to bring the largest impact on the world in the next 20 years to come.
Mr. Dahiya, what can India's fintech world really teach the world about financial inclusion now?
I think financial inclusion, what we have achieved in the last few years with identification as in Aadhaar, with the payments as in UPI, and I think what we will achieve in the coming future essentially means our data is safe, it is not in private hands, and at the same time, almost the entire country, I would say, unless somebody is really inhibited for some very peculiar reasons, I would say more than 80% of the country is now using that digital infrastructure. That is what financial inclusion is. On the rails of this, you will see, and you are already seeing, a lot of lending happening. I think the next phase is to make this digital infrastructure ubiquitous. Access, like what's happening in the UPI now, right? So UPI started off with everybody having to use a few large apps for all their payments, etc. But now UPI has an API layer by which any app, any website can use the UPI directly. And I think that is really the change, because that is when millions of people can use it. Till that happens, to some extent, things will be either controlled by a few private parties or something of that sort. So I think it's a great phase. where, and it's not just in India, it's happening in a few other countries. I'm sure many countries will develop their digital infrastructure and some will leverage each other's. I think it's also a great time when countries start having interoperability of these digital infrastructures, so that, you know, one country's digital infrastructure talks to another country's digital infrastructure, because that is essentially the dream of having one global digital infrastructure.
The eagerly awaited biography of Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson was released today. Isaacson, one of the most prolific biographers in the world, has lived with Musk for the past 2 to 3 years to write about the richest person on the planet. My colleague Danny De Cruz spoke with Isaacson about Musk and what he's learnt about him. Here's a slice of that conversation.
You're one of the very few people who have not only known but lived with two of the biggest icons of the modern world, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. Both personalities have a lasting impact on how the world works. Now, what is the one aspect in which both of them are completely opposite and the other in which they are similar, maybe?
I think that Steve Jobs had a very good sense of human emotion. He could make products that would, as he put it, make our hearts sing, like the iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And he knew, with a feel for design, what would excite people and beauty, and he cared about emotional connections. I think that Elon Musk cares more about engineering and manufacturing. Musk wants to make his own products, and he's a very good material scientist and engineer. But both of them had a sense of mission. They weren't just trying to improve the iPhone a little bit. They were trying to think different, as Steve Jobs said. They were trying to invent things that nobody else had seen. And that's the passion. They both had a passion that allowed them almost to distort reality. People would say, that's impossible. And both Jobs and Musk would say, no, it's not impossible. And he would drive people crazy, but they would also drive people to do things they didn't know they could do.
That's very interesting. And Elon Musk lately has shown a lot of interest in India, in the past few months especially. What does he think about the country now? And do you have any insights on plans for Tesla's entry in India, now that you've lived with him for so long and you've followed his steps? What do you think?
Well, he knows that India and a lot of people in India who love Teslas are very, very eager for him to do more in India. Same with Starlink. And so he likes India a lot, and he visits there. I think that in terms of his future plans, that's a question of foreign direct investment, many other things. When he decided to go into China, there were laws in China that said if you're going to build a car factory, it has to be a joint venture with a Chinese enterprise. And Elon Musk did not want to do that. So for 3 years, he kept refusing to do anything until it could be something that he would control. So I think we can, if you read the chapter or two on China and his understanding of the Indian market, you can see how much he would love to get into the market in India. But the question would be, can he do it and keep control of his factory in the way he needs to?
All right, that's where we leave it on the show tonight. Thanks so much for watching.